The VA St. Louis University Mental Status Examination, or SLUMS examination, is a tool that we use to identify cognitive dysfunction. And we do this by asking a series of questions and calculate a score. It's a 30-point score for perfect responses. And we use education to stratify the patient's score. And we can help to identify either normal or mild cognitive impairment or dementia states. Hello, Mrs. Smith. Nice to meet you.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Today I'm going to be going through the VAMC SLUMS examination, and at the end I'm going to calculate a score and then talk with you about what that means for you. Okay? First of all, what is your age?
79.
Okay. And how many years of school have you completed?
Through graduate school.
Okay. All right. First question is, what day of the week is it?
Thursday.
Okay. And what is the year?
2008.
What state are we in?
Missouri.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you 5 objects to remember. I'm going to say them to you first, have you repeat them back to me, and then I'm going to ask you to remember them a little later.
In the same order?
It doesn't have to be the same order.
All right.
Okay. And these objects are apple, pen, tie, house, car. Can you say them for me?
Apple, pen, tie, house, car.
Good. Okay. The next question is, you have $100 and you go to the store. You buy a dozen apples for $3 and a tricycle for $20. How much money did you spend?
$23.
Okay. And how much money did you have left?
$77.
Okay. We prefer to use the SLUMS for assessing cognitive function because it's much more sensitive than some of the other tools that are available. And it also allows us to stratify individuals early before they actually are fully demented, and perhaps at that point intervene and make the diagnosis earlier. Now, I'm going to have you name as many animals as you can in 1 minute. All right? So I'm going to set my watch. Ready? Begin.
Cats, dogs, horses, cows, birds, parakeets, parrots.
One of the questions that people frequently have problems with is naming of animals. They have 60 seconds to name as many animals as possible, and we're hoping they can name at least 15 animals. They do not get points if they rename the same animal more than once. And what we frequently see is people will think of animals within a certain category, say barn animals or zoo animals, and they won't be able to transition to another category of animals in order to think of 15 or more. Earlier I gave you those 5 words and asked you to remember them. Can you tell me those 5 words I asked you about?
Apple, pen, I don't know.
When we ask them the 5 questions back, frequently people can recall 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 items, but this is a very common area where people are unable to complete the entire task correctly.
I can't remember anymore.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Now I'm going to give you a series of numbers, and I'd like them spoken back to me backwards. So if I say 4-2, you would say 2-4.
All right.
Okay? 8-7.
7-8.
6-4-9.
9-4-6.
Okay? 8-5-3-7.
7-3-5-8.
Okay. The next task is, when we ask someone to draw a clock, we're actually asking them to do several different tasks simultaneously. They have to recognize that there's a circle on the paper, and that represents the face of a clock, and that you would put numbers on the face of the clock in order to put the right time on that clock. A good clock should have all 12 numbers in place in the correct position, and they get 2 points for doing that. Should have both hands on the clock, and those 2 hands should be in the correct position, and they receive 2 points for doing that correctly. For the most severely impaired individuals, they may not be able to put any numbers on the paper at all, or they'll put the numbers outside of the clock ring, or not be able to complete all the numbers on the clock in a circular fashion. In the very demented individual, we also find that they frequently are not able to put hands on the paper at all. Now, also on this piece of paper, I'd like you to take a look at these three objects, and I'd like you to put an X in the triangle. In question 10, we're really testing someone's visuospatial abilities, and this is something that is lost fairly early in the dementia process. So we ask the person to follow a command, and the command is to identify an object, that's the largest, and also to identify a specific shaped object. And this can be very difficult for people in the early parts of their dementia process. For this last question, I'm going to read you a story. Listen carefully, because afterwards I'm going to ask you some questions about the story. Jill was a very successful stockbroker. She made a lot of money on the stock market. She then met Jack, a devastatingly handsome man. She married him and they had 3 children. They lived in Chicago. She then stopped work and stayed home to bring up her children. When they were teenagers, she went back to work, and she and Jack lived happily ever after. Here are the questions I have about the story. What was the woman's name in the story?
Jill.
What kind of work did she do?
Salesperson.
Okay. And when did she go back to work?
When her children were teenagers.
Okay. And what state did she live in?
Chicago.
Okay. Now, I did mention Chicago. What state does she live in?
Chicago.
Okay. Early on in dementia, individuals can recall items they've heard, but they have difficulty interpreting that information. When we ask her for the state, she instead gives us a city. That's the word she heard in the story, but she couldn't interpret that Chicago is actually a city and the state is Illinois. Each question is assigned a certain point value, and as we go through the test, we give them, in some cases, partial credit if they respond partially to the question. In other times, they can only get 1 point, yes or no, right or wrong. At the end of the examination, we calculate their score out of a total of 30, and then depending on their level of education, we can determine whether or not they fall into the grouping of normal or mild cognitive impairment or dementia.